The morning sun filtered through the kitchen blinds, casting golden stripes across the breakfast table where I sat with my coffee, savoring what I thought would be a peaceful Father's Day. At 68, these quiet moments had become precious to me, especially since retirement had stripped away the busy structure that once defined my days. The house felt different now, less like the home I'd built with my late wife Margaret, and more like a museum of memories I was merely curating. "Dad, we need to talk." My son David's voice cut through the morning silence like a blade. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his face wearing that stern expression I'd seen too often lately, the same look his mother used to get when she meant business. Behind him lurked his wife Jennifer, her arms crossed, her perfectly manicured nails drumming against her designer blouse. Everything about Jennifer screamed expensive, from her highlighted hair to her luxury handbag, and I'd learned over the past 3 years that expensive meant demanding. "Of course, son. What's on your mind?" I set down my mug, though something in his posture made my stomach tighten with dread. David pulled out a chair and sat across from me, while Jennifer remained standing, like a prosecutor about to deliver a verdict. "This living situation isn't working anymore," he began, his voice carrying the cold efficiency he'd learned in his corporate job. "You're retired, Dad. You have time on your hands, but you're not contributing to this household." I blinked, feeling as though I'd been slapped. "Not contributing? David, I pay rent. I help with groceries. I maintain the garden, fix things around the house." "That's not enough," Jennifer interjected, her voice sharp as broken glass. "We need more from you, Frank. Real help." My name sounded wrong coming from her lips, like she was tasting something bitter. In the 3 years since David married her, she'd never once called me anything warmer than my first name. Not Dad, not even father-in-law. Just Frank, spoken like an accusation. David leaned forward, his hands clasped on the table. "Here's the thing, Dad. Jennifer needs a driver. Her car's in the shop indefinitely, and with her job, the shopping, her appointments, she needs reliable transportation." "I thought you were handling that," I said slowly, though I could already see where this conversation was heading, like watching a car accident in slow motion. "I can't keep taking time off work," David snapped. "Do you know how that looks? My career is at a critical point right now. The partnership track doesn't wait for family inconveniences." Family inconveniences. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. Was that what I'd become? Jennifer stepped closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor Margaret and I had installed 25 years ago. "So here's your choice, Frank. Either you get a job and start pulling your real weight around here, or you become useful by driving me where I need to go. Consider it earning your keep." The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, the same clock Margaret had insisted we buy for our first anniversary. Each tick seemed to echo the beating of my heart, which was pounding so hard I was sure they could hear it. "And if I refuse?" I asked quietly. David's face hardened, and for a moment, I saw a stranger wearing my son's features. "Then maybe it's time you found somewhere else to live." The words hung in the air like smoke from fire. I stared at this man I'd raised, this boy I'd taught to ride a bicycle, whose scraped knees I'd bandaged, whose college tuition I'd worked double shifts to pay. The boy who'd cried in my arms when his mother died, who'd promised me I'd always have a home with him. "Today is Father's Day," I said softly, the words barely above a whisper. Jennifer let out a small, mirthless laugh. "What photos?" I asked, though something in Jennifer's expression made my stomach tighten. Jennifer closed her eyes, as if gathering courage. "I found a box of photos in the garage when we were cleaning last month. Pictures of you and Margaret and David when he was little. There was one. She paused, her voice breaking slightly. There was one of Margaret teaching David to make cookies, and they were both covered in flour, laughing. David looked so happy, so innocent. I remember that day. David was 8, and Margaret had decided he needed to learn to bake. They'd made such a mess that I'd spend an hour cleaning flour out of the kitchen drawers. I stared at that photo for an hour, Jennifer continued, looking at Margaret's face, seeing how natural she was with him, how effortless their relationship seemed. And I realized David has never looked at me the way he looked at her in that picture. Rebecca squeezed her hand again. Tell him the rest. Jennifer took a shaky breath. I tried to throw the box away. I didn't want David to see it. Didn't want him to start missing what he'd lost. But I couldn't do it. Instead, I hid it in our closet, and sometimes when David's at work, I look through those photos and I see what a real family looks like. My heart broke a little for this woman who'd been carrying such pain. Jennifer, those photos don't show a real family. They show moments. Good moments, yes, but Margaret and David and I had our struggles too. But you loved each other. We did. But love isn't something you're born knowing how to do. It's something you learn, something you practice, something you choose every day. Jennifer wiped her eyes with her napkin. I don't know how to do it. I don't know how to be part of a family. My own family was broken, and David's family was perfect before I came along. David's family wasn't perfect, I said firmly. It was wounded. Margaret died, and David and I were both lost. We're still lost, still figuring out how to be a family without her. That's why I wanted you gone, Jennifer whispered. Because you remind him of what he lost. Because when he looks at you, he remembers his mother, and when he remembers his mother, he realizes what he settled for when he married me. The pain in her voice was raw, honest, and it reframed everything I thought I understood about the past 3 years. Jennifer hadn't been trying to drive me away out of malice. She'd been trying to protect herself from the constant reminder that she wasn't Margaret, that she never could be. Oh, honey, I said, the endearment slipping out naturally. You didn't replace Margaret. Nobody could. But you weren't supposed to. David didn't need another version of his mother. He needed someone to help him build a new kind of family. Rebecca smiled through her own tears. That's what I've been trying to tell her for months. The thing is, I continued, looking directly at Jennifer, I've been guilty of the same thing. I've been comparing you to Margaret too, seeing you as an intruder in the family we used to be instead of as the foundation of the family we could become. Jennifer looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. Do you really think we could be a family? All of us. I think family is something you build, not something you inherit. I think it takes work and patience and forgiveness. And I think it starts with all of us deciding to stop being afraid of each other. Rebecca raised her water glass. To new beginnings? Jennifer managed a small smile. To new beginnings. I raised my glass as well. To learning how to love without fear. As we drank our toast, I felt something shift in the air between Jennifer and me. Not friendship yet, but the possibility of it. For the first time since David's wedding, I could see the woman my son had fallen in love with, the woman who was brave enough to admit her fears and strong enough to try to change. My phone buzzed with a text from David. Is everything okay? Jennifer's not answering her phone. I showed the message to Jennifer. What should I tell him? She looked at Rebecca, then at me, then took out her own phone. Instead of calling David, she sent him a text. Everything's fine. Frank and I are having a real conversation for the first time. Don't wait up. We might be a while. Then she turned off her phone and looked at me expectantly. So, Frank Morrison, tell me about my husband when he was little. Tell me about the boy I never got to meet. And for the next 2 hours, in a restaurant patio in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday, I told my daughter-in-law stories about her husband's childhood, about his fears and dreams, and the countless small moments that had shaped him into the man she'd married. She laughed at the story of his first day of school, when he tried to take his pet turtle for show and tell. She teared up when I told her about the night he'd cried in my arms after Margaret died, asking me if love was worth the pain of losing someone. It is, she said quietly when I finished that story. Isn't it? Worth the pain. I thought about Margaret, about the 42 years we'd had together and the 3 years I'd spent missing her. Every second of it. Even when it scares you, especially when it scares you. Fear means it matters. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Jennifer asked me the question I'd been waiting 3 years to hear. Will you teach me how to be part of this family? I smiled, feeling Margaret's presence in the warm evening air. We'll teach each other. The house was dark when we arrived home, but David's car was in the driveway. Jennifer had been quiet during the drive, processing everything we talked about, occasionally asking me to clarify a story or elaborate on a detail about David's childhood. He's probably worried, she said as we sat in the car, neither of us quite ready to go inside and face the consequences of our afternoon of honesty. Probably, I agreed. The question is, what are we going to tell him? Jennifer looked at the house I'd built, where I'd raised my son, where 3 generations of hurt feelings and misunderstandings had been festering. The truth, I guess. That's a scary proposition. She smiled, and I realized it was the first genuine smile I'd ever seen from her. You said fear means it matters. We found David in the kitchen, pacing like a caged animal. His hair was disheveled, his tie askew, and there were papers scattered across the table where he'd apparently been trying to work but couldn't concentrate. Where have you been? He demanded the moment we walked in. I've been calling both of you for hours. I thought something happened. Something did happen, Jennifer said quietly. I had a conversation with your father. David looked between us suspiciously, as if trying to detect signs of warfare. What kind of conversation? The kind we should have had 3 years ago, I said, taking a seat at the table. The kind where people tell the truth instead of dancing around their feelings. Jennifer sat beside me, a gesture that clearly surprised David. Frank told me about your childhood, about your mother, about the man you used to be before you decided that love was a luxury you couldn't afford. David's face flushed. I never said. You didn't have to say it, Jennifer interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. You've been living it. We both have. David slumped into a chair across from us, looking suddenly exhausted. I don't understand what's happening here. What's happening, I said, is that your wife and I discovered we have something in common. What's that? We both love you, and we're both tired of pretending that love is conditional. David stared at us like we were speaking in code. This is about the driving thing, isn't it? Look, if you don't want to do it. It was never about the driving, Jennifer said. It was about feeling like I had to compete with your grief for your attention. It was about being afraid that you married me because you couldn't have your real family back. And it was about me feeling like I become a burden instead of a blessing. I added, like my presence in your life was something you had to manage rather than something you could enjoy. David looked down at his hands. I never meant for either of you to feel that way. Intention and impact are different things, son. You can hurt people without meaning to, especially when you're hurting yourself. Jennifer reached across the table and took David's hand. Tell me about the day your mother died. David's head snapped up. What? You've never told me. In 3 years of marriage, you've never once told me about losing her. You've told me she was wonderful, that she was perfect, that she was irreplaceable. But you've never told me what it felt like to watch her die. David tried to pull his hand away, but Jennifer held firm. Jennifer, I don't think. I need to know, because her ghost has been living in our marriage, and I think it's time we talk to her directly. I watched my son struggle with the question, saw the walls he'd built around his grief starting to crack. Why does it matter? Because grief isn't just sadness, Jennifer said. It's love with nowhere to go. And you've been carrying that love around like a secret, like something I'm not allowed to share. David was quiet for so long, I thought he might not answer. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, She asked me to take care of you, Dad. I felt like I'd been punched. What? The night before she died, when it was just the two of us in the hospital room, she made me promise that I'd take care of you, that I wouldn't let you disappear into your grief. His voice cracked. She said you try to make yourself invisible, try not to be a burden, but that I needed to make sure you knew you were wanted. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Oh, David. But I didn't know how, he continued, the words pouring out now like water from a broken dam. I didn't know how to take care of a man who'd spent his whole life taking care of everyone else. I didn't know how to be the strong one when you'd always been my strength. I reached across the table and covered his other hand with mine. So you try to manage me instead of loving me, I guess. And then Jennifer came along, and she was practical and strong, and she didn't need me to take care of her the way I couldn't figure out how to take care of you. It seemed easier to love someone who didn't remind you of your loss, Jennifer said, understanding flooding her face. Someone who wouldn't trigger your grief. David nodded miserably. But then you both ended up in the same house, and I couldn't figure out how to love both of you without feeling like I was failing Mom's memory or betraying someone's trust. So you turned it into a business arrangement, I said, because business doesn't require you to feel anything. It seemed safer. Jennifer was crying openly now, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of finally understanding. You weren't comparing me to your mother. You were protecting yourself from loving me the way you loved her, in case you lost me too. Love is risk, I said quietly. Your mother knew that. She loved you anyway, loved me anyway, even knowing it would hurt when she had to leave us. David looked up at me. How do you do it? How do you keep loving when you know it can be taken away? I smiled, thinking of Margaret's letter in my wallet, of the roses blooming in the garden despite winter and neglect and grief. You love because it can be taken away. You love because it's precious, because it's fragile, because every moment of it is a gift you might not get tomorrow. But what if I'm not good at it? What if I hurt you both again? Jennifer squeezed his hand. Then we'll forgive you and teach you to do better. That's what families do. We learn together, I added. We make mistakes and apologize and try again. That's what your mother would want. Not for you to manage our feelings, but for you to feel your own. David sat in silence for several minutes, processing everything we'd shared. Finally, he looked up at both of us with eyes that looked younger somehow, more like the boy I remembered. I'm sorry, he said simply. I'm sorry for the ultimatum, for making you both feel unwanted, for trying to solve love like it was a math problem. Apology accepted, Jennifer said immediately. Mine too, I agreed. But David, apologies are just the beginning. The real work is in changing how we treat each other going forward. He nodded. What do you need from me? It was such a simple question, but it was the first time in 3 years he'd asked it. Jennifer answered first. I need you to stop being afraid of loving me completely. I need you to let me be part of your grief, part of your healing, part of your whole story instead of just the chapter that came after your loss. David turned to me expectantly. I need you to remember that I'm your father, not your responsibility. I need you to ask for my advice sometimes, to tell me about your day, to act like you enjoy having me around instead of just tolerating my presence. And I need both of you, I continued, to understand that family isn't a burden or an obligation or a business arrangement. It's a choice we make every day to show up for each other, to love each other through the hard times, to be grateful for the time we have together. David was quiet for another moment. Then he did something he hadn't done since Margaret's funeral. He reached across the table and hugged me. Awkwardly, but genuinely, the way he used to when he was little and needed comfort. I missed you, Dad, he whispered against my shoulder. I missed us. We're still here, son. We're still here. 3 days later, my phone started ringing at 6 a.m. The first call was from Mike, so I answered, expecting his usual morning check-in. Frank, thank God you picked up. I've been trying to reach you for an hour. What's wrong? I sat up in bed, immediately alert. It's not wrong. It's incredible. Do you remember Tom Bradley from the old crew? Tom Bradley, my former business partner, the man who'd bought out my share of our construction company when I retired. Of course. What about him? He's been trying to find you. Apparently, there's some kind of development project in Phoenix, something about sustainable housing for retirees. He wants to bring you in as a consultant. I rubbed my eyes, trying to process this information. Mike, I'm retired. That's what I told him. But Frank, he's offering serious money. 6 figures for 6 months of work. And it's exactly the kind of project you always dreamed about. Affordable housing designed specifically for older adults who want to age in community. My heart began to race. After Margaret died, I'd sketched out plans for exactly this kind of project, communities where people could maintain their independence while having access to support and friendship. I'd never pursued it, too lost in grief and too comfortable in the safety of David's house. Why is he looking for me now? Because the investor specifically requested you. Apparently, your reputation for innovative design and ethical business practices has grown since you retired. Tom says this investor has been following your career for years. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden where Margaret's roses were blooming. I don't know, Mike. Things here are complicated. Are they? Or are they finally getting uncomplicated? Before I could answer, there was a knock at my bedroom door. Dad, you okay in there? Come in, son. David entered, already dressed for work, but moving without his usual frantic rush. Over the past 3 days, our morning interactions had become something I looked forward to again. Actual conversations instead of hurried exchanges about logistics. Everything all right? I heard you talking. I covered the phone's mouthpiece. It's Uncle Mike. Something about a job opportunity. David's eyebrows rose. A job? Dad, you're retired. I uncovered the phone. Mike, can I call you back? I need to discuss this with my family. Your family? Frank, you sound different. Stronger. I feel different. Give me an hour. After I hung up, David sat in Margaret's chair, a gesture that would have felt intrusive a week ago, but now seemed natural. What kind of job? I explained Tom's offer, watching David's face for his reaction. I expected concern about my age, or worry about me traveling, or some practical objection that would mask his fear of change. Instead, he smiled. Dad, that sounds incredible. It sounds like exactly what you should be doing. You think so? I think you've been wasting away here, trying to be smaller than you are to fit into our dysfunction. This sounds like a chance to be Frank Morrison again. His words echoed what Mike had said, what Margaret's letter had suggested, what I'd been feeling but afraid to acknowledge. It would mean moving to Phoenix, at least temporarily. So I just got my family back. I don't want to lose you again. David leaned forward, his expression serious. Dad, you're not losing us. You're showing us what it looks like to live fully, to chase dreams even at 68 years old. That's not abandonment. That's inspiration. A few minutes later, Jennifer joined us, drawn by the sound of animated conversation. When David explained the opportunity, her reaction was immediate and surprising. You have to do it. I stared at her. I do. Frank, yesterday you told me that family means showing up for each other, even when it's inconvenient. Well, maybe showing up for yourself is just as important. But what about? What about what? You think David and I can't figure out our marriage without you managing it from the background? She smiled. We're adults. We'll survive 6 months. David nodded enthusiastically. Besides, Phoenix isn't that far. We could visit. You could come back for holidays. And Dad. He paused, his expression growing thoughtful. I'm proud of you. For the first time in years, I'm proud of my father, not because of what you're doing for us, but because of what you're doing for yourself. The words hit me like a physical embrace. How long had it been since anyone had been proud of me for following my own dreams? There's something else, I said carefully. The project doesn't start for 2 months. I could stay here, help you two figure out this new dynamic we're building. Jennifer and David exchanged a look, one of those wordless communications that long-term couples develop. Actually, Jennifer said, we were thinking about taking some time to ourselves. Maybe a belated honeymoon. We never really had one because we were so focused on getting settled, managing your grief, managing the household. You want me out of the house, I said, but there was no hurt in it, just understanding. We want you to have your own life, David corrected. And we want to learn how to be married without an audience. I looked around the room, at the chair where Margaret used to read, at the photos of our life together, at the son and daughter-in-law who were finally learning to be a family. All right, I said. I'll call Tom back. David grinned. Really? Really? But I have conditions. Jennifer laughed. Of course you do. I want weekly phone calls. Real ones, where we talk about our lives, not just logistics. I want photos of your trip. I want to know how you're doing, both of you, not just that you're surviving. Done, David said immediately. And I want you both to promise me something. What? Jennifer asked. Promise me you'll remember what we learned this week. That love isn't a transaction, that family isn't a burden, that taking care of each other doesn't mean managing each other's feelings. David stood and hugged me properly. Not the awkward embrace of guilt and obligation, but the warm, lingering hug of genuine affection. I promise, Dad. Jennifer hugged me too, and for the first time, it felt natural. Thank you, she whispered in my ear, for teaching me that I deserve to be loved without earning it. Thank you for teaching me that being useful isn't the same as being valued. 2 hours later, I was on the phone with Tom Bradley, discussing sustainable building materials and community design principles and the kind of work that made my pulse quicken with possibility. David sat nearby, occasionally jumping into the conversation with questions about the project, his excitement for my opportunity genuine and infectious. One more thing, Tom, I said near the end of our call. I want to dedicate this project to my late wife, Margaret Morrison. She always believed that home wasn't a place, but a feeling, the feeling of being valued exactly as you are. That sounds perfect, Frank. I think this is going to be exactly what you need. As I hung up the phone, I looked around the kitchen where so much pain and healing had taken place over the past week. In a few hours, I'd start packing again, not in defeat this time, but in anticipation of what came next. David was scrolling through his phone, looking at flights to Phoenix. Dad, there's some great deals if you're flexible on dates. When do you want to leave? I smiled, thinking about Margaret's roses, about the scared little girl hiding inside Jennifer's sophistication, about the boy I'd raised who was finally learning to be the man I'd hoped he'd become. Tomorrow, I said. I want to leave tomorrow. That's soon. I've wasted enough time being smaller than I am. It's time to see how big this life can get. My phone was buzzing incessantly as I walked out of the project site meeting, covered in construction dust and grinning like a man half my age. 41 missed calls, all from David's number. My heart clenched with immediate worry. 41 calls meant emergency. It meant something terrible had happened. My hand shook as I hit the callback button. Dad! David's voice was so loud I had to hold the phone away from my ear. Dad, where have you been? I've been trying to reach you for hours. What's wrong? Is someone hurt? Is Jennifer okay? Wrong? Nothing's wrong. Dad, sit down. Are you sitting down? I looked around the construction site, found a stack of lumber, and perched on the edge. I'm sitting. David, what? Jennifer's pregnant. The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. I almost dropped the phone. She's what? Pregnant. We just found out this morning. We went to the doctor because she's been feeling sick and they did a test. And Dad, you're going to be a grandfather. I sat there in the Arizona sunshine, surrounded by the framework of homes that would house people in the golden years of their lives, and felt tears streaming down my face. Dad, are you there? Say something. I'm here, I managed. I'm just overwhelmed. Good overwhelmed or bad overwhelmed. I laughed, a sound that came from somewhere deep in my chest. The best kind of overwhelmed. Oh, son, this is wonderful. How is Jennifer feeling? When is the due date? Have you told anyone else? Slow down. David was laughing too. She's nervous but excited. Due date is early March. And no, we haven't told anyone else. You're the first person we called. The first person they called. Not an afterthought, not an obligation, but the first person they wanted to share their joy with. We want you to come home, David continued. Not to move back in. We know you love what you're doing out there. But we want you here when the baby comes. We want our child to know their grandfather from the very beginning. Wild horses couldn't keep me away. Really? Because I know the project is important. David, stop. This is a grandchild we're talking about. This is the future. Of course I'll be there. We talked for another 20 minutes about due dates and doctor's appointments, and whether they were hoping for a boy or a girl. Healthy, David kept saying. We just want healthy. When we finally hung up, I sat on that pile of lumber for another 10 minutes, watching the sun set over the mountains and thinking about the strange turns life can take. My phone rang again. This time it was Jennifer. "Frank, congratulations, sweetheart. I'm so happy for you both." "I'm scared," she admitted. "What if I'm terrible at this? What if I don't know how to love a baby the way a mother should?" "Oh, honey," I said, my voice gentle. "Do you remember what I told you about David when he was born? About how he couldn't contribute anything for the first 3 months of his life?" "Yes." "You're going to take one look at that baby, and you're going to understand what unconditional love really means. It's not something you have to learn or earn or figure out. It's something that happens to you like breathing." "But what if—" "Jennifer, listen to me. You spent the past 3 months learning how to love David without conditions, learning how to be part of a family without fear. Those aren't just skills for being a wife. They're the foundation of being a mother." She was quiet for a moment, then, "Will you really come home when the baby's born? I'll be on the first plane. You'll have to chase me away with a stick." She laughed, and in that laugh, I heard the sound of a woman finally believing she deserved all the love the world had to offer. That night, I called Mike to share the news. He whooped so loudly his neighbors probably thought something was wrong. "A great-grandfather. Frank, can you believe it? Mom and Dad would be so proud. Margaret would have been beside herself with joy." I agreed. She always said David would make a wonderful father someday. And now he gets to learn from the best grandfather a kid could ask for. After I hung up with Mike, I walked outside to the small patio of my temporary apartment and looked up at the stars. The desert night was clear and vast, full of possibilities I was still learning to embrace. In my wallet, Margaret's letter crinkled softly as I pulled it out to read one more time. "Don't let David's blindness make you blind to your own worth. Be brave, my love. Be the man I married. Be the father David needs, even if he doesn't know he needs it." I thought about the man I'd been 6 months ago, defeated, diminished, accepting scraps of affection and calling it family. I thought about the man I was becoming, building homes for people who refused to give up on life, preparing to welcome a grandchild who would know from their first breath that they were wanted and cherished and valuable simply for existing. I did it, Margaret. I whispered to the stars. I remembered who Frank Morrison used to be, and I think you'd like who he's becoming. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of desert flowers and the promise of rain. Somewhere in California, my son and his wife were probably lying awake, planning for the future and maybe, finally, believing that love was something to celebrate rather than something to fear. In 7 months, I'd hold my grandchild for the first time. I'd tell them stories about their grandmother Margaret, about the roses she planted that still bloom every spring, about the kind of love that survives loss and grows stronger through forgiveness. But first, I had homes to build, dreams to chase, and a life to live at full volume instead of the whisper it had become. I was 68 years old, and I was just getting started. Life lessons for fathers, mothers, and sons. For fathers, your worth isn't measured by your productivity or usefulness. Age brings wisdom and experience that deserve respect, not dismissal. It's never too late to reclaim your dreams and live authentically. Setting boundaries with family doesn't mean you love them less. Your role as a father evolves, but never ends. For mothers, love isn't earned through perfection or constant service. Family dynamics require honest communication, not silent management. It's possible to honor the past while building something new. Fear of abandonment can become self-fulfilling if it controls your actions. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you provide. For sons, your parents aren't problems to be managed, but people to be loved. Grief doesn't heal through avoidance, but through connection. Marriage isn't about replacing your original family, but expanding it. Taking care of someone means honoring their dignity, not managing their feelings. The values you learned as a child don't become obsolete in adulthood. For all families, love is a choice made daily, not just a feeling. Honest conversations are more valuable than comfortable silences. Everyone deserves to be seen and valued for who they are. Forgiveness is the foundation of lasting relationships. Family is built through presence, patience, and unconditional acceptance. Does that have to do with anything? Everything, I wanted to say. It has everything to do with everything. But instead, I looked at my son, searching his eyes for any trace of the boy I'd once known. Is this really what you want, David? He couldn't meet my gaze. It's what needs to happen, Dad. We're not running a charity here. A charity? My own son saw me as charity. I stood slowly, my knees protesting, a reminder of the years I'd spent on construction sites, building a life for my family. I need some time to think about this. You have until tomorrow morning, Jennifer said, checking her expensive watch. I have a spa appointment at 10, and I'll need a ride. As I walked toward my room, I heard David call after me, his voice softer now, tinged with something that might have been regret. Dad, this doesn't have to be complicated. Just try to see it from our perspective. I paused at the foot of the stairs, my hand gripping the banister that I'd sanded and stained myself 30 years ago. Happy Father's Day to me, I murmured and climbed the stairs to my room. The same room where Margaret had breathed her last breath 3 years ago, where I'd held her hand and promised I'd be okay. But as I closed the door behind me and sat on the edge of the bed Margaret and I had shared for 40 years, I realized I wasn't okay. I hadn't been okay for a long time. I spent that Father's Day alone in my room, staring at the walls covered with family photos, images of better times when love wasn't conditional and family meant something more than financial transactions. There was David at 5, grinning toothlessly on his first day of school. David at 16, proudly showing off his first car that we'd restored together in the garage. David at his wedding, looking so happy I'd thought nothing could ever dim that light in his eyes. How wrong I'd been. The smell of barbecue wafted up from the backyard, where David and Jennifer were hosting their friends for what they called a Father's Day celebration. I hadn't been invited. Through my window, I could see them laughing and drinking wine that cost more than I used to make in a day. Jennifer was holding court, her animated gestures suggesting she was telling one of her stories, probably about her latest shopping triumph or spa experience. My phone buzzed. A text from my brother Mike in Phoenix. Happy Father's Day, little brother. Hope David's treating you like the king you are. I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. Having a quiet day. Thanks for thinking of me. What else could I say? That my son had given me an ultimatum? That I was being reduced to a chauffeur or evicted from the home where I'd raised him? Mike had warned me about moving in with David after Margaret died. Get your own place, he'd said. Independence is dignity. But I'd been so lost, so broken by grief, that I'd gratefully accepted David's offer to take care of me. Now I understood the true cost of that care. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself in Margaret's jewelry box, looking at the ring she'd worn for 42 years. Beneath, it was a letter she'd written to me during her final days, one I'd never shown David, one that contained words I'd never share with anyone. My dearest Frank, it began in her careful handwriting. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably feeling lost. But I need you to remember something important. You are not a burden. You're not diminished by age or retirement or grief. You are the strongest man I've ever known, the best father David could have asked for, and you deserve to be treated with respect and love, not obligation. The letter went on, but I had to stop reading as tears blur my vision. Margaret had seen this coming somehow. She'd known that without her as a buffer, things might change between David and me. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Dad, David's voice sounded uncertain. Can I come in? It's your house, I replied, not looking up from the letter. He entered quietly and sat in the chair by the window, Margaret's reading chair. I saw you didn't join us outside. I wasn't invited. David was quiet for a moment. Then, you're always invited, Dad. This is your home, too. I finally looked at him, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of the boy I remembered. Is it? Because this morning, it sounded very much like it wasn't. He ran his hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized from his childhood when he was struggling with a problem. Jennifer, she's under a lot of stress right now. Her career is demanding and without a car. This isn't about her car, David. I folded Margaret's letter carefully and placed it back in the jewelry box. This is about respect, about family, about whether your father is a person worthy of dignity or just a problem to be solved. That's not fair, isn't it? I stood and walked to the window, looking down at the party below. When did I stop being your father and become your burden? David's reflection appeared next to mine in the glass. You're not a burden. Then what am I? He was quiet for so long I thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, I don't know anymore. The honesty of it cut deeper than any ultimatum could have. At least he was being truthful. Your mother wrote me a letter before she died, I said quietly. She was worried about what would happen to our family after she was gone. She said love isn't something you ration or conditionally distribute based on usefulness. She said family means showing up for each other, especially when it's inconvenient. Mom was always idealistic. I turned to face him. And you're not. I'm practical. I have responsibilities now. A wife, a career, a mortgage that would terrify you. I can't afford to be idealistic. You can't afford not to be. I sat back down on the bed, suddenly feeling every one of my 68 years. I made my decision, son. David straightened, his business face sliding back into place. Okay, what is it? I'll leave. Something flickered across his features. Surprise, maybe even disappointment. Dad, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because if I stay and become Jennifer's chauffeur, I'll lose whatever dignity I have left. And if I stay and refuse, you'll resent me for making your life difficult. Either way, I lose my son. You're not losing me. I smiled sadly. I lost you the moment you married a woman who sees me as a problem to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I lost you when you started seeing your home through her eyes instead of through the eyes of the boy who used to beg me for bedtime stories. David stood abruptly. This is ridiculous. You're being dramatic. Am I? Tell me, David, when was the last time you asked me about my day? When was the last time we had a conversation that didn't involve my rent payment or household chores? When was the last time you seemed genuinely happy to see me? He opened his mouth to answer, then closed it. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. I'll start packing tomorrow, I said finally. Give me a week to find a place. Dad, his voice cracked slightly, and for a moment, he sounded like the little boy who used to crawl into bed with Margaret and me during thunderstorms. It's okay, son. Sometimes love means knowing when to let go. He left without another word, and I was alone again with the photos and memories and the echo of laughter from the Father's Day party I wasn't welcome to attend. The next morning, I woke before dawn and began the process of dismantling a life. It's remarkable how much you can accumulate in 68 years, and even more remarkable how little of it seems important when you're boxing it up to leave. Jennifer had already left for her spa appointment. In an Uber, I noticed with grim satisfaction, so the house was quiet except for the sounds of David getting ready for work. We moved around each other like ghosts, each pretending the other wasn't there. I started with the easy things, clothes, books, the few kitchen items Margaret had given me for my birthday over the years. Then came the photographs, each one a small stab of memory. Here was David's first Christmas, his face covered in wrapping paper and wonder. Here was our family vacation to Yellowstone when he was 12, all of us grinning beside Old Faithful. Here was his high school graduation, where he'd thanked me in his speech for being the kind of father every kid deserves. What had happened to that grateful boy? When had he become this calculating stranger? My phone rang, startling me from my thoughts. Mike's number appeared on the screen. "How's the king of fathers today?" he asked cheerfully. I almost laughed. If only he knew. Packing, actually. Packing? Going somewhere fun. Moving out. The words felt strange in my mouth, like speaking a foreign language. What? Frank, what the hell happened? So I told him. Everything. The ultimatum, the chauffeur demand, the Father's Day that wasn't. Mike listened without interruption, and when I finished, the silence on the other end of the line stretched so long I thought we'd been disconnected. "Mike? You there?" "I'm here." His voice was tight with controlled anger. "I'm trying very hard not to drive to California and knock some sense into my nephew. It won't help. Maybe not, but it would make me feel better." He sighed heavily. "Frank, you know you're welcome here. Phoenix is nice this time of year. Well, nice for Phoenix. Dry heat and all that." The offer was tempting. Mike was a good man, a successful contractor who'd never married but had built a comfortable life for himself. He had a guest house, space for an old brother who needed a fresh start. "I might take you up on that," I said. "Good. But first, let me ask you something. What would Margaret want you to do?" I looked at the jewelry box on my nightstand, where her letter waited like a message from beyond. She wanted me to fight for my family. Then why aren't you fighting? It was a fair question, one I'd been asking myself all night. Because I'm tired, Mike. I'm tired of fighting for scraps of affection for my own son. I'm tired of walking on eggshells around that wife of his. I'm tired of feeling like a stranger in my own family. "So you're just giving up?" "I'm accepting reality." "Bullshit." Mike's voice turned sharp. "The Frank I know doesn't give up. The Frank I know fought his way through poverty, built a business from nothing, raised a son as a single father after his wife died, and never once backed down from a challenge. What happened to that man?" I looked around the room, at the boxes half filled with a lifetime of memories, at the photos of happier times, at the bed where I'd held my dying wife and promised to keep going. What had happened to that man, indeed? "Maybe he died with Margaret," I said quietly. "Well, maybe it's time to resurrect him." After we hung up, I sat in the silence for a long time, thinking about Mike's words. Had I really become this defeated, broken version of myself? When had I started accepting crumbs instead of demanding the full meal? Margaret's letter seemed to glow from inside the jewelry box, calling to me. I pulled it out and read it again, this time focusing on the parts I'd skipped the day before. "I know you're going to retreat, to make yourself smaller so you don't inconvenience anyone. But Frank, my darling, you've never been an inconvenience. You've been a gift. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise, not even our son. Sometimes the people we love most are the ones who take us most for granted. Don't let David's blindness make you blind to your own worth." She'd known. Somehow, she'd seen this exact moment coming. "Be brave, my love. Be the man I married. Be the father David needs, even if he doesn't know he needs it. Don't let grief or age or circumstances make you forget who you are. You are Frank Morrison, and you bow to no one." I folded the letter carefully and slipped it into my wallet next to the photo of Margaret and me on our wedding day, young and fearless and ready to take on the world. Maybe it was time to find that fearlessness again. A sound from downstairs caught my attention. David's briefcase hitting the floor, his keys jingling as he prepared to leave for work. I had a choice to make. I could continue packing, accepting defeat with dignity, or I could remember who Frank Morrison used to be. I walked to the window and looked out at the garden I'd been maintaining, at the roses Margaret had planted and I'd kept alive through 3 years of grief. They were blooming beautifully, a riot of red and pink and yellow that she would have loved. Those roses hadn't given up. They'd survived her death, the harsh winter, my neglect during the worst days of grief. They kept reaching toward the sun, kept blooming, kept being beautiful despite the circumstances. Maybe it was time I learned something from them. David was in the kitchen, gulping coffee and scrolling through his phone with the harried expression of a man perpetually behind schedule. He looked up when I entered, and I saw something flicker across his face. Relief, maybe, that I was finally accepting the situation. "Morning, Dad. How's the packing going?" I pour myself a cup of coffee, taking my time, letting the silence build. "I've been thinking about your ultimatum." It wasn't an ultimatum. It was a practical solution to a difficult situation. I sat across from him at the table where we'd eaten countless meals, where I'd helped him with homework, where Margaret had served birthday cakes and Christmas dinners and all the small celebrations that make a family. You're right. It was practical, very businesslike. David's shoulders relaxed slightly. "I'm glad you understand. I know it seems harsh, but..." "Which is why I have a counterproposal." He looked up from his phone, eyebrows raised. "A counterproposal?" I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had in months. "You see, son, I've been thinking about practicality too. About business arrangements and mutual benefits, and all those corporate terms you love so much." "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Well, you've made it clear that this is no longer a family home, but a business arrangement. Rent, contributions, earning my keep, very transactional. So I thought I should approach this like a businessman." David set down his phone, giving me his full attention for the first time in months. "Okay, I've lived in this house for 45 years. I built the deck, installed the hardwood floors, renovated the kitchen twice, landscaped the entire backyard. I have receipts for over $100,000 in improvements and maintenance." "Dad, where is this going?" "I'm getting there." I took a slow sip of coffee, enjoying the look of confusion growing on his face. "Now, I've been paying you $800 a month in rent for the past 3 years. That's $28,800 for what amounts to one bedroom in a house I helped build. You're not just renting a room. You have access to the entire house, utilities included. At market rate, a bedroom in this neighborhood rents for about $600. You've been overcharging me." I pulled out a small notebook where I'd been doing calculations since dawn. "By my math, you owe me about $7,200 in overcharges." David's face was turning red. "This is ridiculous. Your family. We don't charge family market rates." "Exactly." I leaned forward, feeling the old fire rekindling in my chest. "We don't charge family market rates. We don't give family ultimatums. We don't treat family like employees or burdens or inconveniences." "Dad, I'm not finished." My voice carried the authority I'd once used on construction sites, the tone that could quiet a crew of 20 rowdy workers. "You want to run this household like a business? Fine, let's talk business." I opened my notebook to a page filled with numbers and calculations that had kept me awake all night. The average cost of full-time personal driver and household maintenance services in this area is about $4,000 a month. Since you're asking me to provide both services plus pay rent, you're essentially asking me to work for you while paying you for the privilege. David stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Dad, this isn't..." "Let me finish the math." I was warming up now, feeling more alive than I had in years. $4,000 for services, minus $600 for fair market room rental, means you should be paying me $3,400 a month. Times the 3 years I've been providing unofficial maintenance and household services, plus the overcharges, you owe me about $130,000. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of Jennifer's taxi pulling up outside. "Of course," I continued, my voice softening slightly, "I'm willing to waive the debt in exchange for something very simple." "What?" David's voice was barely above a whisper. "An apology. Not for the business arrangement. I understand you need to make practical decisions. But for forgetting that I'm your father. for treating me like hired help in my own home, for giving me an ultimatum on Father's Day without even acknowledging what day it was. David's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Dad, I didn't mean. Here's my counter-ultimatum, son. I stood, feeling taller than I had in months. You want a driver for Jennifer? I'll do it. But I charge $50 an hour, payable in advance, with a 2-hour minimum per trip. You want maintenance work? I charge $75 an hour. That's below market rate for a skilled contractor, family discount included. This is insane. Is it? Or is it just business? I smiled, and I could feel Margaret's spirit in that smile, her strength flowing through me. You want it practical, David. This is practical. The front door slammed, and Jennifer's voice echoed through the house. David, is someone going to help me with these bags? I looked at my son, this stranger wearing the face of the boy I'd raised, and made a decision that would change everything. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. I'm going to help Jennifer with her bags, because that's what decent people do for each other. Then I'm going to drive her wherever she needs to go today, free of charge, because I'm a gentleman and she's my son's wife. David looked hopeful. Dad, But tomorrow, the meter starts running. You want my services, you pay my rates. You want me to live here as a family member, you treat me like family. You can't have both the emotional distance of a business arrangement and the financial benefits of family obligation. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and David, if you choose the business arrangement, I'll be giving you 30 days' notice as soon as I find other accommodations. Because I'm nobody's indentured servant, not even my son's. Jennifer appeared in the doorway, her arms full of shopping bags and her face flushed with irritation. Are you two just going to sit there while I struggle with these bags? I stepped forward and took the bags from her arms, my old muscles protesting, but still strong enough for the task. Of course not, Jennifer. Let me help you with those. She blinked in surprise. In 3 years, this might have been the first time I'd volunteered to help her without being asked. Where would you like me to take you today? I asked politely. I have a hair appointment at 11, then lunch with Rebecca at 12:30. Then I need to stop by the department store. Very well. I'll have the car ready in 10 minutes. As I carried her bags upstairs, I heard David behind me, his voice uncertain. Dad, we need to talk about this. We do indeed, I called back without turning around. But first, I have a job to do. For the first time in 3 years, I felt like Frank Morrison again. The drive to Jennifer's hair appointment was quiet-filled, with the kind of awkward silence that settles between people who've never really tried to know each other. I'd expected her to sit in the back seat like a proper passenger, but she'd surprised me by sliding into the front seat, her designer purse clutched in her lap like armor. You don't have to do this, you know, she said finally as we stopped at a red light. I glanced at her in the rearview mirror. Do what? Play chauffeur. David said you weren't happy about the arrangement. David said a lot of things yesterday. I pulled forward as the light changed. Most of them true, actually. Jennifer was quiet for several blocks, staring out the window at the upscale neighborhood where her salon was located. Then, unexpectedly, she said, I know you don't like me very much. The honest admission caught me off guard. I don't know you well enough to like or dislike you, Jennifer, but you disapprove of me. I considered this carefully. Did I disapprove of her? Or did I just disapprove of what she turned my son into? I disapprove of anyone who treats family like employees, even when the family member isn't contributing. There was again that cold assessment of human worth based purely on economic output. What exactly do you think contribution means? She turned to face me, and I was surprised to see genuine confusion in her eyes rather than the usual calculating coldness. Paying your way, being useful, not being a burden. Is that how you measure your own worth? Of course. Isn't that how everyone does? I pulled into the parking lot of her salon and turned off the engine, then swiveled to face her fully. This was the longest conversation we'd ever had, and despite everything, I found myself curious about this woman who'd had such influence over my son. "Can I ask you something, Jennifer?" She nodded, though she looked wary. "Do you love David?" "What kind of question is that?" "An important one. Do you love him for who he is, or for what he provides?" Her face flushed. "That's insulting." "Is it?" "Because from where I sit, you seem to view everyone in terms of their utility. David is useful because he has a good job and earning potential. I'm useless because I'm retired and elderly. But love doesn't work that way." Jennifer's hands tightened on her purse. "You don't know anything about my marriage." "You're right. I don't. But I know something about my son." I turned back to face forward, speaking to her reflection in the windshield. "David used to be the kind of boy who brought home stray cats because he couldn't stand to see anything suffer. He once spent his entire allowance buying groceries for an elderly neighbor who was too proud to ask for help." People change, do they? Or do they just learn to hide who they really are? Jennifer was quiet for so long, I thought the conversation was over. Then, in a voice so small I almost missed it, she said, "My father left when I was 7. I waited, sensing there was more. He said we were too expensive, that we were dragging him down." She stared at her hands. "My mother worked 3 jobs to try to keep us afloat. I swore I'd never be dependent on anyone, never be the reason someone felt trapped." Something shifted in my understanding of this woman. "Is that why you work so hard? Why you're so focused on financial independence?" "Independence is survival." Her voice was bitter. "The moment you need someone, the moment you can't pay your own way, that's when they leave." I saw it then. The scared little girl hiding behind the designer clothes and cold calculations. Jennifer wasn't cruel. She was terrified. Terrified of being abandoned, terrified of being seen as a burden, terrified of needing anyone. "So you've convinced my son that love is conditional," I said gently. "That family is a business arrangement where everyone has to earn their keep. It's realistic. It's tragic." I turned to face her again. "Jennifer, do you know why Margaret and I took David in when he was born?" She frowned. "What do you mean, took him in?" "He's your son. Biologically, yes. But he was born 6 weeks premature, with underdeveloped lungs and a heart murmur. The doctors weren't sure he'd survive. The first 3 months of his life, he couldn't contribute anything. He couldn't even breathe on his own." Jennifer's eyes widened slightly. "Margaret and I took turns sleeping in the hospital, holding his tiny hand, reading to him even though he couldn't understand the words. We spent our entire savings on medical bills. I worked double shifts to pay for treatments that might not even work." "But he was your baby." "Exactly. He was our baby, and we loved him before he ever did anything for us. Before he could walk or talk or contribute or earn his keep. We loved him because he existed, because he was ours, because family doesn't come with conditions." Jennifer stared at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "That's the love I've been waiting to see from you," I continued. "Not love based on what someone can do for you, but love based on who they are. And that's the love I've been missing for my son, the unconditional acceptance I taught him, that he seems to have forgotten." Jennifer's phone buzzed with a reminder about her appointment. She gathered her purse but didn't immediately get out of the car. "What if he leaves anyway?" she asked quietly. "What if I'm not enough, even when I'm trying my best? Then he wasn't worthy of your love in the first place." I met her eyes in the mirror. "But I don't think that's David. I think David is confused, caught between the values he was raised with and the fears you've shared with him. I think he's forgotten that real love is a gift, not a transaction." She sat there for another moment, then opened the door. Before getting out, she turned back to me. "Frank, yes. Thank you for the ride. It was such a simple thing, but it was the first time she'd ever thanked me for anything." As I watched her walk in the salon, I realized that maybe Jennifer wasn't the enemy I thought she was. Maybe she was just another casualty in the war between fear and love. My phone buzzed with a text message. "David, how did it go?" I stared at the message for a long time before typing back. "Educational." Then I sat in the parking lot of an expensive salon, thinking about scared little girls and confused sons and the price we pay when we let fear masquerade as practicality. Maybe it was time for some more education. Jennifer's lunch with Rebecca lasted 3 hours. I'd expected to wait in the car, but she'd surprised me by asking if I wanted to join them for coffee. Rebecca, it turned out, was a widow in her 50s who'd been Jennifer's college roommate and remained her closest friend. "So you're the famous Frank," Rebecca said, shaking my hand with a firm grip. "Jennifer's told me a lot about you." "All bad, I'm sure," I replied with a small smile. Jennifer looked uncomfortable. "I never said anything bad about you." "No," Rebecca agreed, studying me with curious eyes. "But you've said very little good, either." We found a table on the restaurant patio, and I prepared myself for what I assumed would be an awkward hour of small talk. Instead, Rebecca launched into questions about my construction business, my marriage to Margaret, my experiences raising David as a single father after Margaret's death. Jennifer mentioned that David's considering some changes to your living arrangements, Rebecca said carefully. "Is that what she called it?" I glanced at Jennifer, who was stirring her iced tea with unusual focus. "Rebecca," Jennifer said quietly, "maybe we shouldn't." "Actually, I'd like to hear Frank's perspective." Rebecca leaned forward. "Jennifer's been struggling with this situation for months, and I think she could use some clarity." I looked between the two women, sensing undercurrents I didn't fully understand. "What kind of clarity?" Rebecca smiled. "The kind that comes from honest conversation. Something Jennifer isn't always comfortable with." "Rebecca," Jennifer's voice carried a warning. "Oh, hush." Rebecca waved dismissively. "Frank, Jennifer told me about the ultimatum. She also told me it was her idea." Jennifer's face went pale. "You weren't supposed to." "She's been feeling guilty about it for weeks," Rebecca continued, ignoring Jennifer's protests. "The car thing was just an excuse. She's been pushing David to make changes because she's afraid." "Afraid of what?" I asked gently. Jennifer's hands were shaking slightly as she set down her glass. "Afraid that you hate me. Afraid that you're judging my marriage, waiting for me to fail. Afraid that David will choose you over me if it comes down to it." The admission hung in the air like a confession. I looked at this woman I'd seen as cold and calculating and realized she was just scared, terrified that she wasn't good enough, that she wasn't worthy of the family she'd married into. "Jennifer," I said softly, "why would you think I hate you?" "Because you never talk to me. Because you look at me like I'm some gold digger who trapped your son. Because you compare me to Margaret, and I know I come up short." Rebecca reached over and squeezed Jennifer's hand. "Tell him about the photos." "Rebecca, no." "What?"